As a consumer, a lot of the costs associated with our flights are usually hidden to us. Other than the excess baggage fees, we don't really notice or pay much attention to the numerous costs we incur to get from our source to our destination. However, if you've ever taken a good look at the ticket price, you would most likely notice numerous fees associated with flying. A lot of these fees are usually industry-wide, like fuel surcharges and taxes, but what amount of the fees and costs we incur differ from country to country. Let's take a look at a flight flying from Toronto to Hong Kong, connecting through Chicago, flying with United Airlines. This involves 3 separate countries and 3 separate airports, all with their own customs, regulations, and fees. All flights landing in the US must have all passengers pass through US customs, even if they're connecting and transiting to another country. Luckily, we can pre-clear customs at Toronto Pearson, which hosts US border guards on Canadian soil, which can pre-clear us before we even left Canada, which means we simply just walk out into Chicago O'Hare Terminal without even speaking to a single customs officer. For this, we pay a whole list of fees. Firstly, the US customs fee of $5.50 to pay for the customs guards that have to be stationed at thousands of locations across the country. We also pay a US immigration user fee of $7. This is to process, issue, and validate visas for persons visiting or transiting through the US. The US APHIS fee of $3.96 charged by United States Department of Agriculture to ensure that food, plants, and other animal matter comply with pest and disease requirements. The 9/11 security fee of $5.60, which deals with the enhanced costs and heightened security requirements needed after September 11th. This is why you can be kicked off a flight that flies over the US mainland even if you're not flying to a US airport. Lastly, the US faculty charge. This is where our aforementioned landing fees are reimbursed that go towards the airport we're landing in. This $4.50 charge helps to pay for the upkeep and maintenance of Chicago O'Hare Airport. Lastly, another $7.10 goes towards charging international flights an extra fee over domestic flights, as international flights require more security, more baggage processing time, more passport checks, and generally more security time to make sure bags are checked and stories add up. On the next leg of our flight, we'll be touching down in Hong Kong International Airport, a relatively cheaper airport to land in. 2 fees. The first, $9, which goes towards the Hong Kong airport construction fee, and the second fee of $5.80, which goes towards the Hong Kong security passenger fee. Keep in mind that 60% of passengers landing in Hong Kong are transiting onto other destinations. Saving the best for last, the cost to fly out of Toronto Pearson in the first place, we were charged $19.50 for the Canadian security charge. This pays for security checkpoints that process, scan, and screen passengers prior to flight. We also paid another $18.80 to pay for the costs and use of airport facilities and to maintain and upgrade the airport. And lastly, another $2.40 goes to the harmonized sales tax. And yes, we're the only country that charges taxes on top of fees. This may not seem like a lot compared to Hong Kong and especially the US. However, adding up those fees will make your stomach churn. For our flight, we paid Hong Kong International $14.80. We paid Chicago O'Hare $33.66. Yes, that includes all US security and customs fees. And lastly, we paid Toronto Pearson $40.70. May I remind you all that these prices are in Canadian dollars. So not only are the airlines getting ripped off, but passengers are as well. Even with the large number of American fees and security requirements, it's still cheaper than flying through Canada, which is why you almost never see passengers connecting through a Canadian airport. In fact, Toronto Pearson has one of the lowest transit rates of any major airport in the world. Dusseldorf Airport in Germany, which handles nearly half as many passengers, processes more than twice as many transits as Toronto Pearson. Only 10% of the people landing in Toronto connect to other destinations, most of which are domestic and right here in Canada, meaning we're far from becoming an international hub. However, these are just the costs. Where do the millions of dollars of fees go to? Well, All Canadian airports are operated by local airport authorities, of which collect fees and pay for expenses and costs associated with the day-to-day operation of the airport. However, they don't own the airport. Transport Canada does. And these airport authorities pay rent to Transport Canada, just like how you would pay rent for an apartment. Transport Canada doesn't pay for any of the day-to-day expenses of airport operation. They just swing by and collect an enormous rent check. This is actually a rarity, as in almost every other country on earth, countries do not use this model of airport rents. The airports in other countries are treated like trains or highways. The value of having cheap, efficient travel for tourists, visitors, and even local Canadians transiting or coming home is unmeasurably valuable, so many countries don't even earn money from air travel fees. However, that's not the thinking of Transport Canada, which seeks to impose high levies and high rents on airports, driving up the cost of flying. If this both confuses and angers you, you're not alone. If we take a look at Canada's largest airports by passenger count, almost all of them are earning a profit. Toronto Pearson, despite taking in $1.3 billion in revenue and only earning a net profit of $111 million, is still earning a small profit. Vancouver International earned a little over $88 million. Montreal International earned $35.8 million in profit, nearly double the previous year. Calgary International earned $36 million. Edmonton International lost $3.5, but I wouldn't blame them. And lastly, Ottawa International earned a modest profit of $2 million. And of course, all these figures include the airport rent that they have to pay, that almost no other airports in the world have to. So, our airports are profitable even with the unnecessary rents. Just imagine for a second how much cheaper air travel would be if these airports didn't have to charge such high fees. Transport Canada is actually a rarity in the aviation world. It's an agency that regulates air travel, but also is single-handedly responsible for every single form of transport in Canada, from ships to cars to trucks to trains and even hot air balloons. Nothing moves in this country without Transport Canada's approval. Have you ever got your car's safety or had emission tests run on your car? Do you ever wonder who's responsible for getting railway crossings checked out or clearing large ships to enter Canadian waters? All of this falls under the responsibility of Transport Canada. We're one of the few countries in the world that does not separate its aviation market from the regulation of all other forms of transport. In the US, the Federal Aviation Authority handles all civilian aviation in the United States. They don't handle anything else. In the EU, the air travel there is handled by the European Air Safety Agency. In Australia, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. In Japan, it's the Japan Civil Aviation Authority. In fact, Canada is one of the few large developed economies in the world not to have an independent aviation authority, which puts us in the same boat as much smaller countries like Sweden, the Netherlands, Iceland, Finland, and Denmark. All of these countries are already covered under the EU Common Area, which means their transport authorities are largely redundant in terms of air travel. That actually leaves one country that has the same transport model as Canada, Afghanistan, which doesn't speak too well to our regulation model. The irony is, the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is part of the UN that regulates air travel standards for the entire world, is located in Canada. Yes, the agency responsible for regulating all other civil aviation authorities is in a country that doesn't even have a separate civil aviation authority. The more you know. The important reason for why the cost to fly is separated from all other forms of travel is, well, in the details. Taking a look at Transport Canada's financials, Transport Canada in 2017 took in $459 million in revenue from all forms of travel and enforcement revenues. However, the vast majority of that revenue came, $331 million in fact, exclusively from airport rent. In fact, another $25 million came from just aircraft maintenance and flying fees. This means that our agency that is responsible for regulating all forms of travel gets 77% of its revenues strictly from aviation fees. Seems unfair? Well, it is. Transport Canada loses $974 million a year and relies on a $1.2 billion transfer payment from the Canadian government, very little of which actually is spent on regulating air travel. while still retaining 77% of its revenues from the very industry it does very little for. And this is exactly the problem. We are overcharging airlines and air travel passengers to subsidize the rest of the transportation system? The answer is yes. If you look at the $6 million Transport Canada received from the Ship Source Oil Pollution Fund, a levy paid by oil transporting ships, which acts as a sort of insurance fund in the event of an oil spill. In fact, going through this 31-page document, I could not find a single source of considerable revenue coming from railroad companies, shipping companies, or even trucking companies, who make up the vast majority of transportation in Canada, and especially the vast majority of accidents. It's no wonder that this document is filled with such ambiguous language like a clean transportation system or internal services, which is just an easy way to say $168 million of taxpayer dollars spent on people in an office moving paperwork back and forth. We understand that transportation, whether personal or commercial, is the lifeblood not only of our economy, but our societies. We accept that we need to pay taxes and fees to maintain, regulate, and ensure the safe and efficient travel of all people across this enormous country. But keeping an unfair levy on the aviation market through unnecessary airport rents when almost no other country charges airport rents like Canada does, because they largely understand that the economic benefit that comes from cheap and efficient commercial air travel greatly outweighs any potential loss in revenue. But in Canada, we continue to make air passengers foot the bill for all other forms of travel. But that's just the second part of the story. In the third part, we'll take a look at what role the airlines have in this, as Canada really only has two major airlines servicing 35 million Canadians.